the princess who mocked all men, but he made her kneel. Welcome to our storytelling channel, where legends come to life and emotions run deep. If you're watching this, we'd love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop your location in the comments and join our growing community of story lovers from around the globe. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you won't miss tomorrow's special tale. It just might be the one that stays with you forever. In the heart of a golden kingdom called Elmridge, where the rivers shimmered like glass and the hills rolled for miles in soft waves of green, there lived a princess named Madelyn. She was the only daughter of King Grant and Queen Eliza, rulers beloved for their wisdom and generosity. From the moment Madelyn entered the world, it was clear she was unlike anyone else. With eyes the color of storm-touched skies and hair that cascaded down her back like a curtain of midnight, she captured the attention of all who looked upon her. But it wasn't just her beauty that made people stop and stare. It was her presence. Even as a child, Madelyn walked with a quiet confidence. Servants would pause in their chores just to watch her pass. Visitors from distant provinces brought gifts just for the chance to see her smile. She was calm, collected, poised beyond her years. At 17, she had already read more books than the royal scholars. By 27, no man had ever touched her heart. And that was where the mystery began. Word of her grace spread far beyond Elmridge's borders. Suitors came in droves, kings from neighboring lands, sons of wealthy ranchers, noblemen who owned ships, vineyards, or empires. They came bearing diamonds the size of walnuts, silk spun with gold, and tales of their daring feats across the seas. Some were gentle poets who recited verses beneath her balcony. Others were fearless warriors who boasted of their victories in lands 200 miles away. Yet, every single one of them failed. Not one man could stir even a flicker of emotion. In her gaze, the people whispered behind curtains and beside market stalls. Why does she refuse them all? They asked. Is she cursed? Does she dream of someone else? But no one had an answer. Even Queen Eliza, who watched her daughter with quiet affection, could not explain it. She is waiting, the queen once said softly, for something no one has brought her yet. What that something was, no one knew. King Grant, a proud and fair man of 58, began to grow uneasy. Though he respected his daughter's independence, he knew the kingdom watched closely. Some feared the gods would frown upon a future without an heir. Others simply feared what they could not understand. Still, Madelyn remained unbothered. She sat on her marble throne with her chin held high, observing each suitor with calm detachment. She asked questions that left scholars speechless and made warriors tremble. They speak too much, she once said to her maid, and say nothing. And so the years passed and the line of failed suitors grew longer. Each man left humbled, some in silence, others in anger. Yet through it all, Princess Madelyn remained untouched, her heart as elusive as the wind that dances over the Elmridge fields. Until one day a stranger would arrive, not to impress her, but to challenge everything she thought she knew. And that's where the real story begins. As Princess Madelyn grew older, the whispers across Elmridge turned from admiration to unease. The people began to talk, louder this time, not just in hushed tones behind velvet curtains. In the markets, in the courtyards, even within the marble halls of the castle, a single question echoed. Why does she refuse everyone? By the time she turned 27, more than 100 men had come and gone, each convinced they were the one who could win her heart. But none left with her favor. Some blamed her pride. Others claimed it was a curse, something ancient and unseen. The tension reached the throne itself. King Grant, who had always defended his daughter's right to choose, now felt the weight of a kingdom growing restless. One evening, as the sun dipped below the far hills and bathed the sky in amber light, the king summoned his council. Gray-haired advisors, generals with decorated uniforms, even high priests gathered in the great hall. The air was thick with worry. The people are growing fearful, one elder warned. They believe the gods will punish us for her silence. King Grant stood at the head of the long oak table, his hands clenched into fists. He was a man of patience, but even patience has limits. She is my daughter, he said firmly, but she is also the future of this land. If the gods turn against us, it is not just her fate at risk, it is ours. And so, with a voice that boomed through the palace walls, King Grant made a royal decree. From this day forward, any man who believes he is worthy of my daughter may step forward. If he wins her heart, he will have half my kingdom, 125 square miles of our richest lands, and the right to sit beside her as ruler of Elmridge. But if he fails, he must leave these borders forever. No second chances, no returns. The news spread like wildfire. Within days, the kingdom's gates were flooded with new faces, more confident, more ambitious, more determined than ever before. There were men with muscles like carved stone, war veterans in their mid-30s who had once held back armies. There were tech barons from the western provinces with fortunes measured in millions. One even arrived in a custom-built carriage lined in platinum. But Princess Madelyn remained the same. She watched each of them calmly, asking her quiet, piercing questions. What do you fear most? When was the last time you failed? Do you know the sound of silence when no one is watching? One by one they faltered. One by one they fell. And outside the castle walls the tension deepened. People waited. Eyes turned toward the palace windows, hoping to see a sign, any sign that their princess had chosen. But day after day the doors opened only for defeat, until the day a man arrived, with no title, no riches, and no fear in his eyes. And everything began to change. The air was different that morning. It wasn't the weather, though the sky was cloudless and the breeze unusually still. It was something else. Something in the way the guards stood straighter, or how the palace servants paused a second longer in the halls, like they could sense it too. The line of suitors outside the gates had grown shorter. Hope was fading. Even the boldest men had left Elmridge empty-handed, their pride shattered and their names forgotten. The people began to wonder if anyone could truly reach Princess Madelyn's heart, or if the king's offer was just another legend doomed to fade. But then he arrived. He didn't come with a caravan, no fanfare, no banners, no gold. He walked alone, dressed in a black cloak that trailed just above the stone ground, his boots silent against the palace steps. His hair was dark, his face calm. His presence wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. When the palace guards moved to stop him, he didn't flinch. He simply looked them in the eye and said one word, Asher. That was all, no titles, no lands, just a name. Word of his arrival spread like lightning. By the time he reached the throne room, the court had gathered in silence. Queen Eliza raised an eyebrow. King Grant leaned forward in his seat, fingers steepled beneath his chin. And Madelyn, she sat tall and poised, her expression unreadable. He didn't bow, he didn't kneel, he didn't even lower his gaze. State your business, the king said, voice sharp. I heard your call, Asher replied simply. I came to see if the princess is worthy of me. The room gasped. You could feel the air get heavier. Never in the history of Elmridge had a man spoken such words in front of the royal family, especially not that man to this princess, but Madelyn. She didn't smile like she usually did when someone tried to impress her. She didn't tilt her head or offer a clever retort. She stared, and for the first time she felt something shift inside her. His words weren't arrogant. They weren't meant to insult. They were calm, grounded, terrifying in their honesty. This wasn't a man playing a part. He wasn't here to please her. He wasn't performing. He was watching her, and worse, he saw her. What do you seek? She asked quietly. Truth, he replied. Nothing more, nothing less. The silence that followed stretched like a string pulled tight between them. King Grant broke it with a single strike of his staff against the floor. You know the terms, he said. One night in the princess's chamber. If you fail, you leave Elmridge and never return. Asher nodded once, No hesitation, no questions. Madelyn stood slowly, her eyes still locked on his. "There's still time to walk away," she warned. But Asher didn't move. And neither did she. They turned together and disappeared behind the tall palace doors. Outside, the people held their breath. Inside, everything was about to change. The chamber door shut behind them with a deep, echoing thud, the kind that made the rest of the palace seem miles away. For the first time in her life, Princess Madelyn wasn't sure what would happen next. Every man who had entered this room before Asher had tried to dominate the space, filling it with noise, compliments, boasts, or desperate attempts to prove their worth. But Asher didn't move. He stood just inside the room, quiet, still like he belonged there but didn't care if anyone agreed. Madelyn watched him from across the room, her pulse slow but heavy. She wasn't used to this kind of silence. It wasn't awkward. It was deliberate, controlled, like he was waiting for her to make the first mistake. She lifted her chin and let her voice break the silence. "You're quiet," she said, crossing her arms. "Is that part of your plan? Or are you just afraid?" Asher's lips curled slightly, not a full smile, more like a reaction he didn't bother hiding. "You speak like you're still in control," he said. Her eyes narrowed, but he wasn't. "Finished. But I think you already know you're not." It hit her like a cold wind, not because of what he said, but because it was true. She had been the one to ask questions, to push buttons, to make men stumble. But Asher wasn't stumbling. He wasn't even blinking. She stepped closer, letting the golden cuffs on her wrists catch the light from the torches. Her voice was low, smooth. "You don't bow, you don't compliment, you don't even pretend to be impressed. Tell me, Asher, what is it you do?" He met her eyes without hesitation. "I wait." "For what?" she asked, circling him slowly. "For you to stop pretending." The words sliced through her, clean, precise, undeniable. She wasn't even sure what she was pretending, only that he had seen it. For a moment she was silent. Then, without thinking, she stepped in closer, close enough to see the calm in his gaze, the steadiness. She lifted one hand and let her fingers graze the edge of his cloak. "You think you understand me," she said, "but you don't know what I've seen, what I've done to guard this heart." Asher didn't pull away. "I don't need to understand you," he said. "I only need to stand where others have fallen." Madelyn inhaled sharply. For the first time, she felt herself unsteady. Not from fear, but from recognition. This man hadn't come to win her with charm or muscle. He came to stand his ground, and she didn't know what to do with that. So she stepped back, regaining her breath. "You assume much," she said, regaining the ice in her voice. "I assume nothing," he replied. "I see." Another long silence, then she gave a nod, cool and measured. "You have until sunrise." Asher returned the nod, then turned toward the guest quarters without a word. When the door closed behind him, Madelyn let out the breath she didn't know she'd been holding. And in the silence, for the first time ever, she wasn't sure who was testing who. Dawn broke like a whisper. The palace courtyard, usually alive with movement, had fallen silent. Every guard, every noble, every servant held their breath as the great doors began to open. No one spoke. No one dared. They all waited for the same thing, to see if Asher, this strange man with no title, no army, no treasure, would walk out like the rest, broken, defeated, humiliated. But he didn't. He stepped into the light with his head held high, the same calm expression carved across his face. His black cloak moved gently with the breeze. There was no stumble in his step, no fear in his eyes. Something was different, and then they saw her. Princess Madelyn followed, just a few paces behind him. Gone was the sharp smirk she once wore like armor. Her shoulders weren't squared with pride, and her eyes, they didn't blaze the way they used to. They were calm, quiet, steady, but haunted. The whispers started almost immediately. "She's changed," someone said. "Look at her," another murmured. "She doesn't look like she won. She looks like she lost something." King Grant rose from his throne, watching his daughter and the man who stood before him. He had seen hundreds of suitors walk through that door, but never like this. Never with his daughter trailing behind them, her silence louder than any rejection. "You have done what no man before you could," the king declared, his voice strong but uncertain. "As promised, half my kingdom is yours." But Asher didn't move. He didn't kneel, he didn't smile. He didn't reach for the crown or ask for gold. Instead, he slowly turned toward Madelyn, and his eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes, held something new, something heavy. Madelyn took a step forward, her breath catching in her throat. Then he spoke. "The prophecy," he said softly, more to her than to the king, "never promised a reward. Only a price." The court fell dead silent. King Grant frowned. "What do you mean?" Asher lifted his hands. Madelyn gasped. His fingers were fading, slowly, painfully, turning to ash. The wind carried tiny flecks of him into the air. His cloak, once black and firm, began to dissolve like smoke under sunlight. "No," Madelyn breathed, her voice cracking. "No, you can't." He looked at her, his expression calm, even kind. "It was always the cost," he said. "To reach your heart meant leaving mine behind." She lunged forward, trying to grab his hand, but there was nothing to hold. Her fingers passed through him like mist. Panic surged in her chest, hot and uncontrollable. "I won't let you go," she whispered. Asher gave her one last smile, soft, sorrowful. "You already have." And then he was gone. Not a sound in the hall, not a word from the crowd, just Madelyn standing in the space where he'd been, her hand frozen midair. The princess who had once broken every man had finally been broken herself. But this time it wasn't by pride or power. It was by love. And love, as she learned too late, always demands a price. What would you have done if you were Princess Madelyn? Would you have opened your heart sooner? Do you believe Asher was her destiny, or just a fleeting moment meant to teach her something deeper? This story isn't just about royalty or romance. It's about the cost of vulnerability, the price of pride, and how love can appear when we least expect it, and vanish just as quickly. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think the gods were cruel, or was this fate always sealed? Is Asher truly gone, or could his spirit still linger, watching over her in the wind? Have you ever met someone who changed you, even if they didn't stay? Leave us a comment and share your thoughts, feelings, or your own experience with love, loss, or that one person you can't forget. Your voice matters here. We read every comment, and your perspective might just help someone else see this story in a new light. And if you felt something, anything, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for tomorrow's story. Because some tales don't end, they echo. So tell us, what stayed with you the most after hearing Madelyn and Asher's story?